having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Okay, so jumping right into it, this deep dive is all about a film that's, well, really blown up, taken over conversation since it dropped.
You mean Straw?
Yeah, exactly, Straw. The new Tyler Perry film just hit Netflix June 6, 2025. And we're digging into this, like, really comprehensive review we've got here, trying to pull out what's most important about it.
Right, and the source, it kind of flags the genre straight off.
Yeah.
Psychological crime drama. The review calls it a harrowing descent into desperation.
Sounds intense.
It does. The source says it doesn't, pull punches on the brutal realities, really looks at how, like, systemic failures hit people hard when they're under pressure.
Okay, so our mission here then, using this review as our guide, is to really unpack this story. Look at that central performance getting all the buzz.
Taraji Henson, yeah.
Right, and understand that that big twist everyone's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of get to the heart of the themes the source says it tackles. What can we really learn here from this review's perspective?
Okay, let's dive in.
So let's set the scene, just like the review does. It's all about Janiyah Wilkinson, played by Taraji P. Henson.
Yeah.
And the source makes it clear right away. Single mother facing, well, pretty unbelievable circumstances.
Yeah, and the core of it all, according to the source, is her little girl, Aria. Gabby Jackson plays her. And Aria's got this severe illness. The review says she's a chronically ill young daughter who needs this, critical medicine, expensive stuff.
And their living situation, the review points out, is adding to the stress. They're in a dilapidated apartment.
No.
Not exactly stable.
No, and that feeling of, like, crisis and just instability. The review says it's palpable right from the start. It lays out the daily grind of poverty. There's an eviction hanging over them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the source mentions this, like, shame, Aria can't afford school lunch. And then the big one, the constant, overwhelming burden of medical bills for Aria's illness. It's just relentless.
So the review basically stacks all this up to show how it leads to what it calls Janiyah's worst day of her life.
Exactly. And that day, the source details how it just spirals so fast. It's like this rapid fire sequence of awful things pushing her right to the edge.
Okay, so what hits first?
First, she gets fired from her job, grocery store.
Okay, bad start.
Then, right after, the source points out, they deny her final paycheck.
No. So she has no money for the medicine.
None. Completely cut off from getting Aria's meds.
And then it gets worse.
Oh, yeah. The review calls it a cruel twist of fate. She gets robbed at gunpoint. But here's the kicker. Somehow she becomes the prime suspect in that robbery.
You're kidding. How?
It's complicated. But the review stresses when she goes to the bank later, her intention is simple. She's intending only to cash a check for Ori's medicine. That's it.
Okay, so just trying to get the funds she needs.
Right. But the source says it escalates incredibly fast. It's like, confusion and sheer panic. Plus she forgot her ID.
Oh, that combination.
Yeah, it leads her to pull out a gun. And
Yep.
just like that, the source says she becomes this accidental bank robber and hostage taker.
Wow. From 0 to 100.
Totally. Which kicks off this tense standoff with law enforcement. And the review highlights Detective K. Raymond Tiana Taylor calls her a compassionate negotiator who's trying to bring things down.
Okay, so there's a potential lifeline there, maybe.
Maybe. But then there's the public reaction the source mentions. A crowd gathers outside and they're getting, like, increasingly sympathetic. They start chanting, "Free Janiyah," because it's all being live streamed.
So the public sees her as the victim in all this.
It seems like it. And the review points out how Perry uses this whole pressure cooker situation, not just for drama, but to explore those deeper themes, systemic injustice, the weight of poverty,
Right.
and what the source calls the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator when survival is on the line. It kind of forces you, the viewer, to question who's who.
You know, with all that intensity, that situation,
Yeah.
the review really drives home that what holds it all together, what the source calls the undeniable heart and soul of Straw, it's got to be Taraji P. Henson's performance.
Oh, absolutely. The review uses the term masterclass, and it's not just like one note. The source really emphasizes how she shows this whole range of raw emotion,
Yeah.
shifting from quiet despair to explosive rage and then this profound grief.
And that's clearly hitting home, right?
Yeah.
The review mentions praise from critics and audiences.
Widespread praise, yeah. And the source gets specific about how she does it, talks about her ability to just embody this character who's pushed to her psychological and emotional breaking point. And the review mentions her eyes specifically, how much they convey fear, exhaustion, sadness. Like they tell a whole story without her saying a word.
Yeah.
A story of endurance.
It sounds like the review is saying it's not just about like yelling and crying, but this internal erosion that she makes Jania's desperation feel so real, so palpable.
Exactly. And that's key, right? That connection makes the audience empathize, even when she's making these choices that seem extreme.
Right. You understand why, even if you don't agree.
And the review points out that balance she finds showing this deep vulnerability, but also this like fierce protective maternal instinct. It's complex.
Huh. That's interesting. The source even notes that detail going around online, people calling the performance Oscar-worthy.
Yeah, which the review kind of links back to her track record, roles like Hidden Figures, Benjamin Button, even her last Perry film, Acrimony. You can see how she built up to this.
So with all this going on, how does this film, Straw, fit into Tyler Perry's, whole filmography? Is it typical Perry, or is something different happening here according to the source?
Well, the review says it's definitely quintessentially a Tyler Perry film in some key ways. He wrote, directed, produced it. And it fits his focus on stories about Black women facing, immense adversity, highlighting those social and personal injustices.
Okay, so it's a familiar ground. And the source points out those elements too, right? Like the melodramatic intensity kicking up.
Yeah, that escalating drama. And sometimes dialogue that feels a bit heavy-handed. The review even mentions critiques from places like the Washington Post, noted in the source, about predictable plotting or maybe a lack of finesse.
There's an evolution too.
Right. But the review also really highlights an evolution. It says Straw leans more heavily into psychological thriller elements than maybe some of his other stuff. And that major twist is presented by the source as a really key part of that shift.
Ah, okay, the twist again. The source sees it as him trying something more complex narratively.
Seems like it. An attempt at a more complex narrative structure. Now, the review acknowledges the twist has divided audiences and critics, no doubt, but it argues it still adds a layer of depth and tragedy, regardless.
Interesting. And the supporting cast, the source mentions them.
Yeah, briefly. Gives them credit for solid performances. Mentions Sherry Shepard as Nicole, the bank manager who's sympathetic, and Tiana Taylor as Detective Raymond. And it notes how having veterans like Sinbad and Glynn Turman adds some real weight, too.
Okay, let's really get into that ending. Because the review uses words like shocking and profoundly tragic. Says it completely changes how you see everything.
Yeah, it really does. Because the whole movie, you're seeing things through Jania's eyes, right? You operate under the assumption that everything she's doing, all the desperate stuff, is for her daughter, Araya, who is sick but alive. That's the reality presented.
Right, that's the driving force, the medicine, the urgency.
Yeah, exactly. But the twist, as the review lays it out, hits right when Jania is maybe about to surrender. She gets a phone call. It's her mother. And her mother tearfully tells her that Araya died the previous night from a seizure.
Wait, what? The previous night?
Yeah. The review says this news just shatters the constructed reality that you, the audience, have been living in with Jania. It completely reframes the entire day.
So,
Yeah.
what did happen, according to the source?
Well, the source explains that flashbacks confirm it. Jania was there. She was at the hospital when Araya passed away.
Oh my God.
But the review suggests her mind just couldn't handle it. The overwhelming grief and trauma was too much. So it created this delusion. As the review puts it, she continued to live her day as if Araya were still alive and dependent on her, as a coping mechanism for an unbearable loss.
So the whole day, the job, the paycheck, the bank.
All of it, the source says, was a consequence of this profound, unacknowledged grief. She wasn't trying to save Ari in the present. She was trapped in the moment before she lost her, acting out that need.
That's devastating. The source also mentioned something about the bank scene itself being different.
Yeah, another layer. The review clarifies that the really extreme stuff, the violent confrontation at the bank with tear gas and bullets, that was also largely a hallucination, part of her break.
So what was the reality of that scene?
Much quieter, actually. The review says, in reality, Nicole, the bank manager, Sherry Shepard, calmly talks Janiyah down, and she eventually surrenders willingly. No big shootout, just quiet desperation and then surrender.
But the film still ends with that image. Janiyah being led away in handcuffs, while the crowd outside is chanting, "Free Janiyah," not knowing the truth.
Right. And the review argues that image is deliberate. It's meant to make you grapple with, the nature of reality, perception, and the awful results when someone breaks down under these systemic pressures combined with personal trauma. It makes you ask, how much can a person take before they break?
Wow.
And it's interesting, the source throws in this detail. Apparently, Tyler Perry considered an ending where Janiyah died, but he changed it to this twist, which the reviewer felt was more emotionally impactful, even if it's just as tragic, maybe even more so in a way.
Yeah, that hits hard.
Yeah.
So building off that twist, the review points to some big themes that Straw really gets into, right?
Definitely. Several potent ones. First, pretty obviously, poverty and systemic indifference. The source stresses how the film shows people trapped in poverty, basically with little to no safety net. Janiyah's whole day is shown as this direct consequence of a system that just doesn't offer her any real solutions. Not for the medical bills, not for the lost job, nothing.
Okay. And then the twist really brings grief and trauma to the forefront.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that. How the unacknowledged grief over Arya, mixed with the trauma of her circumstances, leads to her mind's defense mechanism, this delusion, which is protective in a way, but also so damaging.
Which connects to mental health, I guess.
Exactly. The review notes that too. It's not like they give her a diagnosis in the film, but her actions clearly show the psychological toll of extreme stress and loss. It indirectly makes a powerful case for needing better mental health support, especially for people in vulnerable situations dealing with immense hardship.
And finally, the review talks about justice and empathy.
Right. That chant, "Free Janiyah," compared to what was really going on inside her head. The review argues it forces you, the audience, to question your first take on justice, to find empathy for someone whose actions came from such deep desperation and pain, not, malice.
So summing up the reception, the review says it was a big hit for Netflix right away.
Yeah, huge. A global hit. Hit #1 its first week. Instant buzz.
But as the source points out, that familiar split in how critics saw it compared to audiences, especially with Perry's films.
Yep, that pattern held. Audiences, the source says, were largely really positive, especially about Henson. Critics, more divided.
What were the main points of division?
Well, the review summarizes it like this. Some critics saw it as genuinely powerful and moving, a drama that connects with real struggles people face. But others focus on those familiar Perry tropes, the melodrama getting dialed up, maybe some sometimes clunky dialogue, like that Washington Post critique highlighted in the source mention.
Okay, so a mix.
A definite mix. But the source kind of wraps it up by saying, look, regardless of critical consensus, Straw packs a serious emotional punch. It's compelling, even if it's disturbing. And it calls it a powerful vehicle for Taraji P. Henson's exceptional talent.
Right.
And it concludes that the twist, love it or hate it, makes it memorable and thought-provoking. A significant entry in Perry's huge body of work.
Okay. So drawing all this from our deep dive into the source review, we've covered the really grim setup of Straw, the incredible performance from Taraji P. Henson that the review raves about, the absolute shock of that ending twist and what it means, and these really heavy themes, poverty, grief, trauma, mental health, and how it challenges our ideas about justice and empathy.
Yeah, the review makes it pretty clear the film wants to make you think. Really think about the pressures that can just break someone.
So for you listening, what does all this mean when you encounter stories like this one, when you think about them?
It kind of leaves us with this big question to chew on, something the source review definitely brings up. How much do these systemic failures, these cracks in the system, actually create the conditions for people to break down? And maybe even deeper, how does our own perception of what's real shape how we feel empathy, how we judge what's just, especially when someone's dealing with unbelievable trauma? It's definitely a lot to sit with.
Breaking news from the stadium tonight as an anonymous fan foot the bill for 55,000 hot dogs, bringing that sweet tubed meat to everyone in attendance.
Free dogs! Yeah!
55,000 hot dogs? What does that even cost? While the identity of this Frankfurter philanthropist remains anonymous, their all-beefy generosity will go down in history.
The new Mega Millions. More to win means more to give. How you spend it is up to you.
Yeah!
For game odds and details, visit SCEducationLottery.com.